really fantastic news this weekend that government have awarded us finally 28.5 million quid for the A614. Those in the north of the county will know it is the spine of the county from the city all the way up through Bassetlaw to the A1, and there are all sorts of challenges around capacity there, junctions, roundabouts and things that need to be improved for safety, for traffic flows to benefit our economy. That's a huge amount of money, a massive vote of confidence in our delivery and our economic growth, and I'm really pleased to welcome it this weekend.
Okay, thumbs up. That's great. Thank you. So can I welcome everyone to the first Finance Committee of this new cycle? And it's good to see new faces and I won't say old faces, but returning faces to committee. And it's good to be back here in person. And actually, I never thought I'd say this, but it's good to see all of you in person. Let me start with agenda item 1, which is noting the appointment of myself as chair and Councillor Roger Jackson as vice chair of the committee. That's just for noting. In terms of reference and membership, again, for noting, are there any questions, anything anyone wants to raise from the terms of reference? Okay, so I'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting. I appreciate not everybody was on this committee or even on the council at the time. I'll propose them as accurate.
Former second, Chairman.
Thank you, Roger. Unless anybody's got any comment, in which case can I see everybody in favour of the minutes? Thank you, that's carried. So we move on then to the draft management accounts. Sorry, we don't. Minutes, I've done the minutes, so it's apologies for absence, and I don't think everybody is present.
Yeah, so, no apologies, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you, Pete. So we move on then to the declarations of interest to start with. Members or officers, and I don't see any. So item 6 then is the draft management accounts. Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. This report informs the committee of the year-end position for 2021 draft management accounts for both revenue and capital programme. and request the committee recommends the transfer to the general fund balance of 10.2 million for approval by County Council. I won't bore everybody into the background in terms of pulling this set of accounts together in terms of how responding to COVID and the fantastic work that the authority's done in helping the community respond to COVID. Table 1 on page 2 indicates the committee budgets have achieved a net underspending of 21.2 million or 3.8% of net committee budgets. The level of the general fund balance will increase by 10.2 million to 32.1 million. Details of the committee under and overspends are shown in the report. For those who've been here for a while, in September we allocated additional budgets to departments to cover anticipated COVID costs responding to the pandemic and for lost income from the general government grant set aside for COVID-19. As we approached year end, some of these costs were not as high as originally anticipated, especially when government started to provide free PPE from September. As a consequence, some committee underspends will be related to those anticipated costs not being as high as originally anticipated. The most significant movements with committees was by value, adult social care and public health 16.1 million, and by percentage, finance and major contracts management committee at 23.4%. Paragraph 30 sets out the details of the movement of the central items, where the details of the underspending of 30.5 million, and that's also set out in Appendix A. Significant changes being the underspend on government grants of 25.3 million relating to general COVID grants. Any COVID-19 related grant not allocated to committees during 2021 has been set aside to fund future pandemic related issues. This includes the migration of associated shortfalls in collection rates for both council tax and business rates. The report also indicates the movement in balances and reserves. Overall revenue reserves, including the general fund balance and the COVID recovery reserve, have increased by 44.3 million, and that's set out in Appendix B. Moving on to the capital programme, Table 3 on page 8 sets out the final outturn spend for the capital programme at 104.1 million. Slippage has increased to 12.3 million, which is a slight decrease on the period 11 of 2.6 million. Table 4 on page 7 sets out the major areas of investment in 2021. Not surprisingly, 67% of the capital programme was spent on highway schemes, school refurbishment programmes and the school places programme. Paragraph 49 to 52 and Appendix D sets out the variations to the capital programme and to its funding. The latter is surmised in Table 6 on page 10. Overall borrowing is 2.3 million less than the revised estimate due to slippage in the programme and the maximising of the use of grants. The pre-audited statement of accounts will be published on the Council's website before the end of July, in line with the necessary deadline, whereupon the audit will commence. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Nigel. I'll move the recommendations which are on page 19.
Former second chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to put on record my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of the committee to Nigel and his team for getting these management accounts out in a timely fashion with everything else that is going on. And a lot of senior officers, included in Nigel and his team, have been taking on other COVID-related work throughout the pandemic. So the fact that everything is carried on with the day job as well, Nigel, I think it's testament to you and your team. And equally, the fact that the accounts are as healthy as they appear, I think just shows that the whole authorities worked very well throughout the pandemic, not just with all the additional pressures caused by the pandemic, but actually in getting the day job right across the authority carried out as well. So, Tom, I think you indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And I think I'll continue that thanks to Nigel and his team. And obviously, Keith Palfreman's been fantastic working with our group in the last term. And it was really great to have the extension of the briefings from yourself directly, and obviously with Keith always available as well. So it is appreciated, and it's something our group's always welcomed. And I think in that vein as well, obviously, Councillor Jackson, it's good to see you back returned as the chairman. Obviously, we worked well in the last term together. Our group's now got two voices. I will say that Councillor Waters is far more knowledgeable and detailed than me, so you better hope that I ask more of the questions than him from our group. But I think moving on to the finances, I think it's clear from the report itself and the 4 appendices that our accounts have been heavily skewed by the pandemic, and frankly, it couldn't have been forecasted, or it was certainly difficult to, and no more better shown than in the adult social care and the children's social care budgets. But I think my questions, which if it's okay, I'll direct to both yourself, Councillor Jackson, and Nigel collectively, would be how really has this impacted on the medium-term financial strategy, and obviously with the real situation to be reflected in the next financial quarters. I think how accurate really is our predictions going to be, and then referring members to paragraphs 41 and 42 of the report, the COVID reserves. Paragraph 41 specifically refers to our authority receiving unring-fenced COVID-19 core funding totaling 24.8 million. I note that 19.3 million has now been allocated for reserves, but it seems probably my frustration with that would be we've got a lot of businesses on the breadline, a lot of people really struggling. We've put pandemic money that was frankly meant to be out the door straight away in the bank. And I appreciate the opening comments about saying, well, we're putting it away for a later date. People need it now. And it's not to take away from the good work that our council's done, but it seems to me that we've struggled to get some of the money out of the door, Chairman, and constructively, I would ask, have you got any plans to get that money out of the door as quick as possible to the businesses that need it and to the people that need it, whether it be extra carers, families, whatever it might be. And obviously we have arms, I'd suggest respectfully, like the Councillors Divisional Fund, which is a very good way of getting money out of the door, and other mechanisms that we've used, like the COVID Recovery Fund, etc., that seem to me good tools that we could maybe invest more in. And I think at this point, Chairman, I think I'll leave those questions there. I know potentially Councillor Waters may have some questions and other members, but that's it for now.
Thank you, Tom. I think the second part of your question almost answered part of your first part of the question, if you like, in that the impact on the MTFS. We've been Nigel will go into the technical details, if you like, on it, but the decision that we took was to effectively ring fence it so that the MTFS shouldn't be affected, and that any additional costs, because none of us know when this is going to be over and when additional costs for the authority are going to drop out, and it's probably going to be, many months, if not years and more before that happens. So the reason that let's be clear, we haven't banked any money that was given to us to passport on to businesses or communities, and in fact we've put money out through the COVID Recovery Fund and other means into the communities. The COVID reserves that we have may well, and I'm sure will be called on in the future, and we don't know what costs are going to be and for how long those costs are going to be with us. So I think it's a prudent way of doing it. Nigel, do you want to just expand on the MTFS issue?
If I may, thank you, Chairman. To build on Councillor Jackson's response, yep, we've already started to put some money into the community and taken a report for supporting at least £1 million for initial support. But again, it's initial, and that's the issue, is to hopefully that means more is going to follow that once more work is understood in terms of what our community need is. We also quite rightly will see what that means in terms of economic development, in terms of what support our businesses need. So again, all of that will be wrapped up and will be coming back through committee, the relevant committee, in due course. And again, Councillor Jackson is absolutely right. In terms of the MTFS, we've done our best in terms of the way we built it to try and separate COVID out, but it's inevitable, as you're thinking, Tom, in terms of the implications for our MTFS, particularly around children's social care. And that's something that over the coming months we'll understand what that actually means. But again, it depends on how we recover and how the country recovers out of COVID and what that actually means to our communities, particularly for our vulnerable children. Thank you.
If you want to come back briefly, Tom, yeah.
If it's okay with you to come back, and I think really it's a perception thing, and I think I appreciate everything you've just said, but the man in the street, and potentially amplified by opposition councillors, might look at the fact that we raised adult social care precept council tax, which we have every right to do, something that affected every household, 100% of that money will now be going into the bank because we didn't need it this year. And then residents potentially will look at the fact that we've been given money for COVID by the government, and frankly, it's helped our finances massively, but then we are putting the majority of that into the bank. And respectfully, I think all I'd ask, and I'm not looking for a direct answer now, but I'm really just trying to put some seeds in the administration's minds. How can we get that money out as fast as possible? Because that's what people are looking at the moment, us putting money into the bank while watching businesses close. And I've said that already, but let's work together how we can get that money out of the door. And I mean that with as much constructive meaning as I can possibly put it to you.
Yeah, I think the point is it's a COVID reserve. It's not going into general reserves. It's not being banked for, use in 5, 10, 15 years time. It's there for COVID costs, and none of us know what those costs are going to be over the coming months. There's an announcement today which might give us something. There's an announcement in 2 weeks which might spell an end to it, but it might not. And it would be irresponsible to decide just for appearance's sake that we needed to spend all that money as quickly as possible today, only to find that our additional COVID costs carry on over the next 6 to 12 months, and we haven't got the reserve to fund it. So I think we will obviously very closely continue to very closely monitor those costs, but I think it would be wholly wrong to just get that money, as you say, out of the door quickly, only to find that we need it in future to support the services and the extra costs which are in the services. Mike, you indicated.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. First of all, congratulations on being with us again and leading the finance group. I think your openness previously, I look forward to that as well. And we might not see everything the same thing, but I think the way that you've handled the committee was excellent. So thank you for that. And welcome to all the members, both new and old. I will call certain one of them old. Not you. Tom reminded me he was still in his 20s the other day. So. Slightly different to Councillor Hollis's outlook. I recognise the position we're in and the way that the COVID funding has been able to help us on that. I think we could be more proactive in balancing the books in some way, but I do respectfully recognise the need for the COVID reserve to be where it is, because we just don't know where we are. So thank you, Nigel, to you and your team from all of us. And I welcome Councillor Creamer as our lead speaker on this. I know he's having some great discussions with you and the finance team himself. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate the position that we're in, and I'm sure the next 4 years are going to be interesting again.
Thank you, Mike. John.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. The 19.3 million that's there, can that be clawed back? The government keeps saying to us, and they've said it at district level as well, we sat on all this money. Well, one of the reasons some of the districts are sat on a lot of money is the fact that we're doing really due diligence on who we're putting the money out to, because there is organised crime within this country that's actually milking the taxpayers' money. But I was just a bit, we need to be careful on that, because if they suddenly say, right, we're a bit short in the Treasury, we might pull that one back. I'd just like some more safeguarding if possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think the key difference really is that much of the money that went to districts was ring-fenced to be passported straight onto businesses and communities, whereas the money that's come to us almost entirely has been to fund the extra costs of our services to keep providing our services during COVID. Anything to add to that, Nigel?
No, you're absolutely right, and that's the difference. But also, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of our future, exactly what the chairman has said. So that's why I'm a little bit wary to actually deliver some of that. Some of it will also, I think, I'd like to see us investing in terms of the authorities' changes that may be required in terms of working practices. So some of that money may be required to help us invest in our services as, again, we change as a consequence of the COVID and our experiences and understanding from responding for COVID-19. That's why I'd be a little bit hesitant, as the chairman is, in terms of just straightforward giving the money straight out.
Should say as well, we're in a very, very different position to where we were probably a year ago. If we'd have met, well, when we did meet a year ago, I think rightly, and I think everyone agreed with us at the time, we set out to spend what was necessary to spend. And, we'd never ever say this in any other circumstances, but to spend it regardless of where it was going to come from. And it was right to do that. But in those early months, I think we were staring down 20-30 million pounds the wrong side in terms of what we by then got in from government and what we knew we were spending. And I think there's a lot to be said for the work that the Chief Executive and Nigel and us as politicians did, speaking with government and with civil servants to get in the cash that we got in, and it's put us in a far better position. It was Councillor Waters first, Lee, and then I've got you, Jim.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations. And also thank you, Nigel, for speaking with us a week ago. It's much appreciated. What I'd like to ask relate to the COVID funds. Can you tell me the total of the ring-fence monies, how much was actually allocated and how much this council spent and what was sent back to the government after being unable to spend it?
Yeah, Nigel, can you pick that up?
Yeah, overall, I think we ended up with about 82 million of funding from central government, which is a mix of specific and a non-ring-fenced grant or non-specific grant. The non-specific grant was about 42 million, of which part of that underspending, well, that 19 million relates to that non-specific grant that we spent. We have spent nearly all. I think we ended up having to give back about 1.5 million of funding to central government, which related to adult social care workforce, where they gave us money towards the end of the last financial year, anticipated that we would find a lot of adult social care staff out in the community that we would be able to hire at a moment's notice, which proved impossible. So that money was returned. The rest of the money has actually been spent. Very little else has been given back. We've made sure that we've maximised where the government has given a specific grant for those purposes. So that's a lot of infection control grant money that we've had, 1 and 2, that we've put into the community in terms of residential care homes, and also the money for the winter COVID scheme for children and families that require that through the various breaks of Christmas and the February, and now extended through Easter, and then again extended through the summer period.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Councillor Kramer, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, congratulations. And again, thanks, Nigel, as well for the briefing. It's just a simple question on this, and I don't know if we can answer it yet at the moment. But we are putting money into reserves, and again, I can totally understand that work practices, organisations may need to change, so there needs to be some money. But is there any indication whether there'll be any more COVID money coming because of the increase in 3? I mean, that's why you may not be able to answer it at the moment. And do we have a policy on how much we're going to put in reserves of whatever we get? So is there a policy of percentage, or is it look and see if we get any, how much? So it's a bit open-ended question, really.
Yeah, Nigel, pick that up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a very good question. There's been additional announced of money for, like I say, for children and families through the summer, so that we can support children through the summer in terms of free school meals. Those children that are eligible for that, and the government has give us announcements at the beginning of the year for contained management funding money, which again, there's a report's gone to committee in terms of the staffing in order to make that in operation. And again, some money has also gone to district councils in terms of comp. There is no news at all in terms of whether there will be extended comp money beyond March 22. Same goes with PPE. In terms of free PPA is extended until March 22. And again, government's approach has been now starting to make us that we go straight to their portal, and they've invested in their portal, which means residential care homes can go straight to their portal rather than through our process. But there's no guarantee that that'll be free after March 2022. But again, it depends on where we are with the infection and whether you need as much PPE after March 22 as well. So it's a bit of a, we just don't know. In terms of general funding, as part of the local government settlement, the government gave us an extra 16 million, again, to support us as responding to COVID. And I know that's on the next agenda item, which I'll come to in a bit. Some of that money, again, will be needed to support our services through COVID.
Should say as well, we continue to send through to government what's called a Delta return. So this is the, it was monthly to start with, it's now sort of quarterly or a bit different. Is it still monthly? So that's just a position of what our costs are overall right across the organisation due to COVID. And as I say, we'll keep up the pressure and keep up the lobbying on government as and when we need more money from them if costs continue. But on the basis that, you know, we don't know if we'll get any extra cash, we've got a budget as we are doing with the COVID reserves. I think that's the most sensible way through it. If there's nobody else, Tom, you want to come back?
Yeah, just wanted to ask a detailed question on something separate. Was the waste PFI deal? I know it's been mooted amongst the new administration that you'd maybe like to look at changing the contract, renegotiating it. I think it's probably clear to me that it cost a hell of a lot of money to come out. So I suppose we're in the renegotiation territory, something which we support. I just want to make that very clear. And I just wondered how that was going so far, and if there's anything you can share with us now about how that contract's being renegotiated and what you're trying to renegotiate exactly.
Well, I think committee is going to look at what it would like to see from that contract. So I think any discussions with Veolia will need to come out of that committee. We're not major contract management anymore, we're pure finance committee. So that discussion, I think, is for another day once that committee has decided what it might want to see differently from the waste contract. You know, because we had the discussion early on in the last cycle, how difficult it was to get anything extra out of Veolia and how expensive it might be. But I think that's a discussion for another day. Bruce.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman, and congratulations on your elevation. Just really to make comment, really more than anything else, is that agree with the strategy as far as returning and putting some of the COVID money into reserves with no idea what the future holds for us. It was a good job, actually, that we had the available funds we did at the start of the pandemic, and we were able to respond accordingly to help the communities of Nottinghamshire. Had we taken a view that we spend down to the last farthing, then we wouldn't have had that ability, and we would have left many of our communities floundering, trying to deal with the devastating effects of the pandemic. So I think it's very important that as an authority we remain prudent, is the word.
Thank you, Bruce. It's worth noting, isn't it? We were able to spend that money because we had it in reserves, and those were reserves that opposition groups had urged us to spend year after year at budget cycles. So it's a good job we didn't listen. I don't think there's anybody else, in which case, did you want to come back, Lee?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking at page 25, Appendix C. The allocations from contingency, and the council spent £100,000 on a consultation about local government reorganisation. Can you tell me what this was actually spent on? Did it go towards the opinion research service based on Oxford, who reported back in December 2018, or was it on the website? What was the £100,000 actually used for?
I don't know if you got the full detail of that, Nigel. We can probably provide it if not.
Yeah, I believe most of it went on to the external consultants, but again, I can delve into the detail for that for Councillor Waters and for committee.
Okay, thank you. So if there's nobody else who wants to comment, can I see everybody in favour of the report? Thank you. Is there anybody against? And is that 2 abstentions? Okay, so that's carried. Thank you. And I'll move on to item 7, which is the financial monitoring report for period 1. Before Nigel introduces this, I just want to say that obviously in the past this committee's had a monthly cycle. It's moved to a 6-weekly cycle, and I'm conscious that at some points, particularly over the Christmas or over the summer break, we could get to a point when we're several months behind the curve in terms of scrutinising these reports at committee. I've asked Nigel, therefore, to make sure that we can circulate the monitoring reports as we would have done on a monthly committee cycle, so that opposition groups will get sight of this, which I think is important, because as a committee we are here to monitor the finances very closely. So I hope everyone is happy with that as an approach. And of course, then those reports can be debated once we come to the next available committee. Nigel, do you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. And along with issuing the reports, if any member wants to ask questions or wants a briefing on those specifically, I can do. So thank you, Chairman. It's the period 1 monitoring report. It doesn't say an awful lot. I'll apologise for that because it is the period 1 monitoring report. The important things to note is, again, as I've mentioned earlier, is the government provided us with additional money of 16 million for COVID. At the moment, Table 1 doesn't reflect the pressures that we're facing in some of our departments, particularly in children's. So I'd imagine that we get to period 3 monitoring report, again, as we go through, when we get to understand what the costs are, particularly around children's social care, and where we need additional agency workers and the additional costs of placing for children, that will be met from the 16 million, and that will reflect that in the reports. So I'll update members at a future meeting. Points to note for us for this particular point, like I say, is paragraph 17, which sets out a number of contingency requests, including the delivery of the assurance major work programmes of work, amendments to the savings option in adult social care, transformation and change restructure, and the graduate trainees programme. This report gives the usual update to members on Treasury management activities, and because it would be a Q1, it's the end of last year's update in terms of the performance data for debt recovery, accounts payable and the procurement activity. Again, point to note is the residential and domiciliary care costs, or the debt, still increases, and again to be expected. And the accounts payable performance is still phenomenal at above 90% in terms of the paying invoices within 30 days or in terms of trade. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. I'll move the recommendations which are on page 39.
Former Second Chairman.
Thank you, Roger. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of my comments will be based on recommendation 1, just the individual committees themselves. And I think it's difficult not to talk about adult social care and children's social care. And I appreciate they've got their committees, but I think as the Finance Committee, we need to make sure we're watching it. And probably this is some sources of non-political conflict and some that are. And I think the adult social care, although we've been through an unfortunate time with COVID, and I think that's clear. You know, we've lost a lot of loved ones, and we've lost a lot of people that we were as corporate people responsible for, and that's very sad. But of course, it's had an impact on the budget favourably, which is difficult to talk about. And then, but my concern is the exact opposite with the children's. That's clear to me that during the pandemic, for whether it's violence in the families or losing family members, we as corporate parents have ended up with a lot more children to look after. Of course, the figures are in the report of the 500 or so that we've increased by. My concern is this council's about to embark on some real big changes in the children's service. Let's talk about firstly Sure Start centres. Has a very, very minimal impact on the finances of this council, most of them only costing £3,000 a year. I certainly hope that and I know this is a debate that we're going to have a lot, but it doesn't put a lot of pressure on finances. We have the power to say that's important to us. But then secondly to that is the children's homes that we're about to embark on purchasing quite a number. Existing members will be familiar with this, but might be worth pointing out to new members that around 70 to 75% of looked after children come from the Ashfield district. And it's been quite an anomaly so far that we don't have as many centres, because obviously the whole purpose of these kind of places is you keep the kids locally where they've got existing support networks. I think that we could be a rush to buy too quick, and I hope this council, including the Finance Committee, will work with the district councils, especially Mansfield and Ashfield, where most of these looked after children come from, to make sure that we're getting good value for money that often leads to a better placement for both the child and their support network. And I'll use one example. The council's buying their first property within Sutton. It happens to fall in my division. £300,000 might not sound like a lot of money to members from West Bridgford, but the average property price in my division is substantially lower than £100,000. We're buying a property on the most expensive street for £300,000, which will only look after 2 children a year. I think those kinds of facilities are fantastic, but it's clear to me that we aren't getting value for money. Just 2 streets away, we could have bought 2 or 3 properties and looked after 6 children. And bearing in mind, we probably need to accommodate at least 40 within Sutton and Kirkby alone. That's just half of Ashfield district. We can't be wasting that kind of money. And ironically, the property they're looking at buying is not on a bus route, completely substantially away from other infrastructure. So I raise a very nitty-gritty issue just to point out the fact that our budgets are going to be extremely tight, but they can be helped by making sure we make prudent decisions that often are right for the finances. But particularly, I'd like to see this committee focusing on the children's services, because I think that's where the pressures seem to be. And obviously, from conversations that we've had with finances at this council, and other members will be privileged to that information as well, that's where a lot of the uncertainty sits as well. So I think this committee will be well tested by keeping an extra eye on it as well. And you have our full support on an apolitical nature with that as well, as best we can.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, this was something I was going to raise on the work programme, something Nigel and I have discussed. And I think it would be right to bring in senior officers from Children's in particular, maybe to our next meeting or two, another one after that, because Nigel's already alluded to a growing overspend within Children's, and I think it's important that as a committee, as the finance committee, we can hold them to account for that and really understand what their plans are and how they're going to deal with it. I don't want to go straying too much into Children's kind of policy issues. The deputy leader's leading a group to look at the council delivery plan, and I'm sure that's on his agenda. He might want to comment on it, but it's a fine line between us concentrating on the finances and delving into the kind of policies in other committees' domains, but certainly we're very alive to the overspends developing in Children's, and we've just got to deal with it. Anybody else? Yes, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Just to actually agree with most of that as well, that we actually do need the value for money, but we need it fairly quickly as well, because it's an emergency basically as well. So we do need to spend wisely, but we need to actually spend quickly as well, which is not a great combination. Just to actually say as well, to actually commend the staff as well on actually paying their bills within 30 days. And the item on recommendation 5 to actually look at the performance and accounts, and just saying on the actual diagram, and I'm sure it's just a blip, but with payment terms on page 37, payment within terms, it's starting to take a slight dip. Is that coming back up again? And I know it's at the end, so it could be anywhere. So, but yeah, commend anyway to pay within 30 days during the circumstances of the last 18 months. I think all the officers and staff ought to be commended.
Yeah, absolutely. Nigel, any comments on that blip?
Yeah, although I might say it's slightly harsh to get down to 94% and say that's a dip in performance. That is quite remarkable in itself, to say it's a dip in performance to get to 94%. I think it was just the Christmas period, and I think we probably do suffer a little bit on the Christmas period.
Right, we'll cancel your leave at Christmas next year to make sure we don't see any drop off in performance.
I think it's because invoices then will appear in for departments, and it's the department staffing that's the issue in terms of getting the invoices through. But that's a minor point. Thank you.
Andre, did I see your hand? Yes.
Yeah, just going about the children care, which I think is extremely important. But when purchasing these houses, and I know that Tom in Ashfield have got the same problem we have at Sutton, the children that go into these houses very often don't come from the area where it's happening. They'll move from other areas into the houses for obvious reasons. However, when a house is being purchased, there's big problems with objections. They're taking a long time to move. We've had 2 in Mansfield that have gone right to the wire, then they've pulled out for one reason or another. So it's extremely difficult to buy these houses. And if you're going to go and buy it in a cheaper area, which I can see where Tom's coming from, you're going to have major problems with those areas around there, because we've got to look at another way of doing it, because that will not work. The residents in those areas, for the wrong reasons, think it's not right. They don't want it in their area, and it's a real problem. So before we spend any money, we really want to think deep and hard about it. Are we going to get value for that money?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Mike, I'm sorry, you did indicate before.
Yeah, sorry, no problem, Chairman. Just to say, yeah, 94% payments okay now. As long as you're not part of the 6% that are getting paid. You know, I've raised a question for having responses to the demands that have been placed on the finances from children. And I'm conscious that we don't product class children, but we prioritise them in the best way that we can, and that it's a long-term thing that we look after, because I think Tom and my friends have, you know, we can make mistakes, and we can make mistakes for the best intentions. But I think, you know, we've had 12 and now 13 million demands on this. We need input from directors from the CLP, but we also need clarification on the length of term of service that will best satisfy the children.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom, do you want to come back?
Apologise to come back on a niche issue, but I think it rounds it off quite nicely. And I think by the sounds of it, we all agree. But it's about making sure you've got all the knowledge, I think, Councillor Camilleri. I think particularly with this niche issue in my division, the first I found out about it was when the council had already put a planning application in. And of course, 4 or 5 months before, they've made an offer on the property, etc. And I think it's actually about using the resource. And I'm very fortunate enough to be the deputy leader at Ashfield in charge of the housing portfolio. You know, a number of our properties each year don't get let out to members of the public. We've given one in Hucknall, for example, to a rehabilitation charity, a respite centre. So it looks after all young people with autism, where the parents drop them off in the morning and they get some respite. That is an Ashfield District Council property that, in my mind, has been put to best use. And you talk about these children's centres, why can't potentially 2 or 3 council-owned properties be used? And of course, it's a lot better value for money. And it actually shows, as Councillor Bradley wants to do, the 2 authorities and all local authorities working together. And the second thing is, it's about actually using local members' information. I'd arguably say, I'm not embarrassed to say that I don't know exactly what's going on in parts of Mansfield and other parts of the county, whereas, yeah, lots of things to fix, isn't there? But I think it's about using the information and realising we aren't always going to agree. But I'd like to think that probably the best placed person to know what's going off in Huthwaite and Carswick is myself, and same with Mansfield for yourself. And it's using all the information we can. And it does come down for value for money and recognising where we're going to get objections, where's suitable. There's all sorts of things when you talk about children's centres, but it's important for the finances. And the reason we're talking about it is because the council is about to embark on one of the biggest purchasing missions that it's ever done on these types of properties. So it's important that if we are buying 20 properties, that we pick them up for the best value for money, and probably look at purchasing them in the most places that balance. If we have to spend 50% more because that's almost 100% chance of getting permission, then so be it. Not spending 3 times more like we have done in the case in my division. And I'm happy to use it as a case study. And interestingly, it's completing today. But we should have been talking about this a few months ago and identifying. But there's already 10 more properties in the pipeline. I'd hope the local members are aware of them. And you certainly, as the chairman of this committee, just keeping an eye on what's value for money. And it makes our lives easier down the road. And we're going to have less arguments when we're putting more money in the bank each year and freezing council tax every year. But that's by the by. But that's all I have to say. And I think by the sounds of it, it's a simple report this time.
Yeah. Yes, Andrew.
Just to close on this one, what are you finding out that these houses are being purchased at premium? They're paying a lot of money for them. They're paying over the odds to the owners of the property, and they're like giving them an offer they can't refuse. And there's been massive problems with neighbour objections and falling outs and real things. So it's got to be a really thought out thing. Just going and buying houses willy-nilly causes absolute havoc in the vicinity that they're being purchased. And everybody knows that children need looking after. But these when they're being purchased, I don't think there's any been thought of it, and it's just causing major problems in Mansfield and Ashfield.
Okay, again, conscious I don't want to stray into kind of direct policy areas of the Children's Committee, but we do want to make sure we're getting value for money. So I'm quite happy to have this put onto the agenda at some point. Whether we're going to get children's reps to come talk to us at the next committee, we can perhaps have 2 agenda items on. Red, you wanted to come in?
Don't forget that property purchases is done by property people.
Yep.
And it goes through the property portfolio.
Yeah.
It's not the children's don't do it alone. And
Yep.
therefore, I think the professionalism of the property people, they mustn't question that.
Yeah. So look, if you can leave it with us to make sure this goes to the most appropriate committee, because it does touch into Councillor Girling's committee and it is obviously in Children's Committee, and we've got the finance brief to look at as well. Don't forget, it's not so long ago we were doing this through third-party commercial organisations, and I think that was very, very poor value for money, and we're talking about G4S at one point, I think, and there are a lot of problems associated with doing it that way. I think the way we're proposing to do it is far better value than we were looking at before, but if members have got real concerns it's not value for money, then we want to look at it, because you know what we want, we've got one budget, and the more value we can get out of it, the more children we can house in the most appropriate way. So if you can leave it with us to just look at which committee that should go to that's most appropriate, we'll make sure it's on an agenda. If there's nobody else, which I don't think there is, can I see everybody in favour of the recommendations? Okay, thank you, and that is unanimous by vote. So I'll move on to the work programme. I've just mentioned a couple of things that we'd like to see on the work programme in the future. Is there anything else anyone would like to see added into this work programme? John?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. The one that seems to keep dropping to the bottom of the list, domestic abuse support services. It was, you know, I kept raising it last time and it seems to have not happened. I'm not saying that because we are a totally male-dominated committee. That hopefully might change in the future, but we do need to look at that because the problems with domestic abuse that's occurred throughout the COVID period. Where you've got lots of things, latest estimated cost reports, and they're significant, that is. And I raise this because the cost, anybody that's trying to build anything at the moment, the costs are escalating now. Some people can say it's Brexit, some people can say it's shortage because people have been on furlough, etc. But it will have a massive effect on the balances of this council, on the cost to this council in the near future. I am told by was our chief exec, now the chief executive, Southgate even, that they were doing some leisure centres, and the estimated cost has gone up £4 million in the period, in the part of trying to get these things built because of shortage of all sorts of things. So I think that's one, as a finance committee, we really need to bring to the committee and let's chew it around and see if there's anything that we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's a good point. I mean, there's 5 items on there which Derek will introduce next time around. So perhaps before introducing them all, he can talk about inflation in the construction industry, because it's a very real issue, as you say. Anything else anyone would like to see added? No. John, on the domestic abuse, it was at the last committee. If there's anything that wasn't covered at last committee which you'd like to see covered, if you want to talk to us separately about putting something on an agenda, I suggest there's a lot on the next one, so it might be into October. But if there is anything that was missing from last time.
It's just really, Chair, an update on, was it 100 million or there was quite a significant, or a million, I can't remember the figure now.
Yeah.
But as to where we were with that, thank you.
I think when we discussed it at the April committee, yeah, we left it a little bit open. We resolved an update we brought forward to future meeting of the committee, and I think we said when there was something meaningful to tell us. So if you can just leave that with us, yeah.
Yeah, I think we really ought to drive it now because you see these horrendous things that are happening. It's almost every day that there's some, you know, either male, female children being involved, all sorts. And I think we ought to try and, you know, nail it. It's going to be difficult to do, but imagine yourself locked up with a thug. You know, when the restrictions are on for going to different places, it must be difficult.
Okay. Well, the October committee will be 6 months on from the April committee. It's probably the appropriate time to bring it forward. So we'll look at that. If there's nothing else, going to see everybody in favour of the work programme. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you.
really fantastic news this weekend that government have awarded us finally 28.5 million quid for the A614. Those in the north of the county will know it is the spine of the county from the city all the way up through Bassetlaw into the A1, and there are all sorts of challenges around capacity there, junctions, roundabouts and things that need to be improved for safety, for traffic flows to benefit our economy. That's a huge amount of money, a massive vote of confidence in our delivery and our economic growth, and I'm really pleased to welcome it this weekend.